सर्वेभ्यो नमः. Sometimes people ask me whether I believe in Punarjanma. I must believe in Punarjanma because I must have done some path and I must have done some punya. I've done some punya, as a result of which today here I happen to have the fortune of being a co-panelist with the Honorable Chief Minister of Madhya Pradesh, Shivraj Singh Chauhan ji, and with someone like Dr. Murli Manohar Joshi ji. But I must have also done some pap for which I'm undergoing the prayaschitta now, which is to be in this very, very difficult and unenviable position of being wedged in between these two speakers. The topic of today's session, the theme, is nationalism in an era of neoliberalism and globalization, which automatically tends to suggest that we are talking about matters economic. I don't think matters economic can be de-linked from other matters. Which is why, although I will focus on the economic, I want to raise some other issues also, as has been raised by the Honorable Chief Minister. Let me begin by quoting something in Bengali. I will not translate it because I will so choose the words that a translation will not be necessary. And this quotation is from something that Swami Vivekananda wrote. As almost everyone present here knows, Swami Vivekananda wrote mostly in English. He lectured mostly in English, but he also occasionally wrote in Bengali. And he wrote very, very powerful prose in Bengali. Bengali is a very delicate kind of language. It's a language in which it is easy to write poetry. It is not very easy to write powerful prose in Bengali. But there are some who did, Swami Vivekananda being one, and Bankim Chandra being another. This particular part that I'm about to quote is something that he wrote both in English and in Bengali. And it was published in a monograph called Modern India. In Bengali, it is called Swadesh Mantra, which I don't have to translate. And the little bits I'm going to quote, I will choose so that no translation will be necessary. He Bharat, ei Paranubad, Paranukaron, Paramukhapekha, ei Dasha Shulabh Durbalata, ei Matra Sambal Korea, tumi Uchcha Padadhikar Labh Koribe. He Bharat, হে ভারতবাসী সদরতে বলো আমি ভারতবাসী, বলো ভারতের দেবদেবী আমার ঈশ্বর, ভারতের কল্যাণ আমার কল্যাণ, ভারতের সমাজ আমার শিশুসজ্জা, আমার যৌবনের উপবন, আমার বার্ধক্যের বারাণসী. If you want an interpretation of nationalism, there can be nothing better than this. The reason I began with this is all of us have multiple identities. All of us wear multiple hats. I am a Bengali, I belong to X community, I belong to Z part of India, I belong to W ethnic community, but transcending all of that, I am an Indian. These multiple identities are not incompatible. They exist simultaneously. Indeed, there are people who have attained moksha. Indeed, there are people who have realized the union with the Sat Chit and the Ananda. I'm not talking about those people who have transcended and overcome ahankar, the sense of I. I'm not talking about those people. Those people are extremely rare. For the vast majority of us, there is I. And I means a sense of pride. If I am not proud of my country, what it means is I am not proud of my own self. If I am proud of myself, I have to be proud of my own country. This is the country in which I was born. This is the country in which all of us probably have been born. This is the country in which we have grown up. This is the country in which we will die. শৈশবের সমাজ শৈশবের শৈশব যৌবনের উপবন বার্ধক্যের বারাণসী. India is in the food that we eat. It is in the air that we breathe. It is in the water that we drink. That is the reason every time I at least come back from abroad and the plane begins to descend, I feel, despite all the pollution and all the problems, that there is a breath of fresh air. Asau sarna lankapuri name lok lakshmana rochate janani janma bhumishya sargadapi gariyasi. Why am I bringing this up? The reason I'm bringing this up is because it is extremely pertinent to what we are discussing today, neoliberalism and globalization. I completely agree with Shivraj Singh Chauhan ji. This is not something on which there needs to be a debate. The issue really is who is shaping that agenda. That's the debate. If we are proud of ourselves, if we are proud of being Indians, then we should increasingly have the confidence that we will be able to shape the nature of that globalization debate. That globalization debate will not be a debate that is thrust upon us. It is a debate, it is an agenda, it is a template that we can inflict, and I am deliberately using the word inflict, on the rest of the world. Neoliberalism and globalization. If I interpret that in the economic context, there are two dimensions. They are related dimensions, but they are two distinct dimensions. One dimension is connected with international and cross-border trade, cross-border capital flows, cross-border labor flows, and it is linked to negotiations. It is linked to negotiations. Those negotiations may be bilateral, those negotiations may be plurilateral, those negotiations may be multilateral, such as through the WTO. In any process of negotiations, to get something, you have to give up something in return. The question really is, what are you giving up and what are you getting in return? It is my submission and it is my proposition that the more confident you are, the more strong you are economically, the more you get and the less you have to give. And it is also a fact that increasingly in these negotiations, it is the so-called developed countries which have become more and more protectionist. And it is the emerging economies like India which now want the liberalization and the globalization. So far as this internal part is concerned, my statement is, the stronger we become economically, the more confident we will be in the negotiations, the more powerful will be our voice, and therefore, this impression that the globalization agenda has been thrust upon us by someone else will increasingly begin to disappear. The second part, which is a linked one, is also economic, and that concerns what can be called domestic economic reforms. It was mentioned in the introduction that I work for Niti Aayog, as indeed I do. And we are in the process of devising a vision document for the country which will look forward 15 years. In drafting that vision document, the two principles, which are principles that the Prime Minister himself has mentioned on several occasions, the two principles are very, very simple. One, as a result of what we do, will the life of the Indian citizen improve? The objective of all government policy, the objective of all governance, the objective of everything that governments, union government or state government is trying to do is to ensure this. Does the life of the Indian citizen, wherever he or she happens to be resident in India, does that improve? And the second principle is, does the life of the Indian entrepreneur improve? The Indian entrepreneur does not mean corporate sector manufacturing. Entrepreneur means someone who takes risks. And the Indian farmer is far, far more risk-prone, takes many more risks than the corporate manufacturing enterprise does. So the idea is to improve the enabling environment for all entrepreneurs. To link it with what I said earlier, when we seek to do this, what the World Bank says in its doing business indicators may be something we would like to notice, but it is completely irrelevant at one level. And do not misunderstand me. What we do is because of what we want to do, not because of what the World Bank suggests. What we want to do is because of what we want to do, not because of what McKinsey has suggested. The agenda, the priorities are our own. Some of you may not know that particularly since 1991, there is a lot of talk of what the World Bank and the IMF have recommended for us since 1991. What you may not know, unless you are an economist, is that these identical agenda items have been mentioned in a succession of internal domestic government appointed committees. One particular example, not the only one, being the Dagley Committee of 1978. So the World Bank and the IMF in 1991 and after 1991 were simply recycling those arguments. They are just recycling them. Let Let me give you a completely different example. For the government, instruction for the government. These are the 17 most important types of civil cases. And you will address them in that particular order of priority, beginning with the most important one. And what is number one? Breach of contract. If I just tell you this, you will think that it is something that has been recommended perhaps by the ADB or the World Bank. This is actually from the Shanti Parva. When Bhishma teaches Yudhishthira, lying down on the bed of arrows, that identical statement is there in Manusmriti. So in terms of our shaping the agenda, if we only read what is there in our texts, including Kautilya's Arthashastra, but Kautilya is not the only one, we will then be able to shape, as I said, the agenda. But this brings me to another point. The word globalization is usually used in the context of economics. But it has another nuance also, and that nuance is culture, Sanskriti, which is part of our history, it's part of our legacy, and the reaction on the part of many countries, including smaller countries in Western Europe, is our culture will be threatened as a result of globalization. Our culture is many thousands of years old. I do not think our culture is so fragile that it will be affected and distorted and influenced by this recent tide of globalization. As Shivraj Singh Chauhan said, globalization is not new at all. All that has changed in this new era of globalization is the form it takes. Even in more recent times, interpreted as cross-border movements of labor, globalization was pretty common in the 19th century. So I do not think our culture is so fragile. What is the problem? The problem, I think, is we do not even know what is our culture. We do not even know what is our legacy. The Namami, the National Manuscript Mission, has a list of 35 million puthis. It's just a list. Maybe the number is even more. Out of this 35 million, not all of which are in Sanskrit, 95% has still not been translated. We don't even know what is in them. If we don't know what is in them, then how will we understand what is our culture and what is our legacy and what is our Sanskriti? If we are not aware, we will have to wait for people from Germany and Oxford to come and interpret for us and tell us what our culture is, which would be a great tragedy. And that's the reason I keep coming back to this point, and I keep stressing this point, that what is important in shaping our attitudes, whether it is to economic and trade negotiations or to globalization, is to have this sense of pride. Let me extend that notion of pride to one other element which is also important. And that element is the notion of dharma. I'm not even going to attempt to translate the word dharma into English, because I do not think it can be adequately translated into English, certainly not in terms of a word like religion. Yah dharyate saha dharma. Whatever holds up is dharma. And dharma has several different nuances. It has an individual nuance. It has a Rajadharma kind of nuance. It has a Varnashram kind of nuance. It has broader nuances also. The simple point is, it is what holds us up. Dharma permeates every element of Indian society. It is pervasive in the behavior of every Indian citizen, regardless of the specific dharma that that Indian may profess. To pretend that dharma does not exist is to ignore the Indian reality. Anyone who traveled extensively throughout India realized that any negation of dharma violates the Indian reality. I'm not even going to talk about people like Adi Shankaracharya and Swami Vivekananda who traveled throughout India and realized this. Even Mahatma Gandhi, who traveled extensively throughout India, realized this. I'm not going to start a controversy or provoke a controversy by bringing in words like secularism. The limited point I want to make is one of the great dangers, I think, that has been done is by importing and implanting notions that are completely alien. So therefore, what we really need, and in that sense, I congratulate the organization of this event, because what this event needs to do is to develop that template. Develop that template through a consensus on what is it that India wants. What is it that India wants in the economic domain? What is it that India wants in the environment domain? What is it that India wants in the culture domain? And until we know what India wants, we will not be in a position to do what is desirable, which is to shape not just the Indian agenda, but also the international agenda. Last words, what do I perceive as the single most important constraint in doing this? Obola kanoma ato bole. I think the single most important constraint is we lack the sense of pride. A, we don't know our legacy. B, we lack the sense of pride. And C, we lack the sense of pride in India because we lack the sense of pride in ourselves. Of course, India has warts and blemishes. While recognizing the warts and blemishes, we can, I think, afford to be proud of the fact that we are Indians. From the snowy-capped mountains of Kashmir to the turbulent oceans in Kanyakumari, from the arid, salty deserts of Gujarat to the lush green forests of Arunachal Pradesh. This is a country I was born in. This is a country that I am proud of. I'm proud to be an Indian. I'm proud to hold up my head and say I'm an Indian. And I think that is the message that should go out. Thank you very much.